Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. One of my favorite Far Side cartoons shows a Native American looking at an instruction manual entitled Rain Dancing 101 and saying, "Oh, 4 steps to the left and then 3 to the right. What kind of dance was I doing?" Above him, old-fashioned egg beaters are cascading down. It's funny and absurd that someone would or could do an egg beater dance. Maybe even more absurd is the idea that there is a God somewhere who would make it rain egg beaters. That's not a God that many of us recognize. What we may find interesting, however, is that the Bible mentions numerous other false gods. In fact, many times the Bible urges us to be faithful to the one true God and not to any of these other gods who are not real. This week, my plan is to introduce you to some of these other gods mentioned in the Bible. In Bible times, there were people who believed in these gods and who worshiped these gods, and while we might read their names as we read the Bible, most of us don't know much about them. I hope to talk about this week, starting with Baal. Of all the other Old Testament gods, Baal is probably the one you are most familiar with. One resource I looked at said that Baal was mentioned at least 90 times in the Bible. In an age when fertility was of paramount concern, Baal rose to prominence. Life in those days required that you be able to grow crops to provide food for yourself and your family. You needed your God to provide rain at the right time for the crops to grow, and Baal was known as the storm god, controlling the winds and the rains. We will talk more about that in a moment. The other part of fertility is that you yourself needed to be fertile in order to have children. These children would help you with your farm, but more importantly, would care for you in your old age and pass on your name and your heritage. Prayers and sacrifices to Baal were meant to entice Baal to provide these things for you. Interestingly, it was thought that if you did the sacrifices or rituals right, then Baal was obligated to provide what you were asking for. Baal was thought of as the god of order and control over chaos. Legends of Baal tell of his battles with a god called Mot, which is a word that means drought or death, and battles with the god Yam, who was over the mysterious and unruly seas. Baal brought order. Particularly the battle with Mot was played out over and over. When the hot summer droughts were in full swing, it was thought that Mot held sway. And then when the fall and spring rains came to water the earth, it was the assurance that Baal had risen and was victorious once again. In fact, they believed that if Baal triumphed, a 7-year cycle of fertility would ensue. But if he were vanquished by Mot, 7 years of drought and famine would ensue. In their view, Baal's victory was essential to life. Now, as I said, Baal is mentioned frequently in the Bible, and most often the prophets speak against Baal and the ways worship of Baal would influence people away from worship of God. One fascinating Bible story about Baal that you are probably unfamiliar with involves Gideon. Gideon is just beginning to heed the voice of God when God tells him to take a bull and pull down the local altar to Baal because Gideon is afraid of what people will think, he does it at night. In the morning, when people discover the altar of Baal has been torn down, they figure out that Gideon has done it, and they try to seize him and kill him. But Gideon's father stops them with a powerfully important question. "Will you contend for Baal?" he asks the people. Then he continues, "If Baal is a god, let him contend for himself." Another key moment in the struggle against Baal involves Queen Jezebel, who was from another country that worshipped Baal, and she tried to establish altars to Baal all over Israel. She established 450 prophets of Baal to serve the nation, and on God's side there was only Elijah. Elijah challenged them, and they all met on top of Mount Carmel. Elijah's challenge was that they each be given a bull to sacrifice, but that they weren't to put fire to it. Each side would call on their God to send down the fire for the burnt offering. The prophets of Baal prayed all day while Elijah taunted them, but nothing happened. When it was finally Elijah's turn, he first poured water all over his sacrifice and altar. Then, after one short, simple prayer, fire came down, consumed the sacrifice, the stones of the altar, and the water in the ditch around the altar. Then Elijah killed all 450 prophets of Baal on that mountain. In both cases, it was clear that God was the real God. Over and over, the prophets urged people to turn away from Baal and worship God. One of the key theological issues that distinguishes Baal from God is that God is Lord of everything and is not trapped in a cycle of nature like Baal was. Our God is autonomous, with independent authority to act as God chooses and when God chooses. We can and should be thankful for our blessings, but I worry about times when we might pray to prosper in one way or another. Praying to prosper is in some ways leaning back into a focus on fertility. I strongly doubt there's a God out there who sends down egg beaters if you dance the right steps. I do know there is the God of love and grace ruling all the earth. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.